The dire wolf is back. That's the headline. The reality? It might be a lab-built proxy. Let's break down what brought back really means. Welcome to the De-Extinction Lab, where extinct animals meet modern science and viral claims get fact-checked. Because de-extinction doesn't always mean the original species is truly back. Sometimes it's a rebuild, sometimes it's an edited stand-in, and in the dire wolf case, that difference is everything. Chapter 1. Meet the real dire wolf. The dire wolf wasn't a fantasy creature. It was a real predator that lived across North America during the Ice Age. Bigger and heavier built than many modern wolves, it likely specialised in taking down large prey, especially in a world filled with giant herbivores. And if there's one place that turned dire wolves into legends, it's the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, where thousands of dire wolf fossils have been recovered over time. You're not imagining it. Dire wolves are one of the most common large predators found there. But here's the most important detail for today's story. For a long time, people assumed dire wolves were basically just ancient wolves. Modern genetics changed that. Chapter 2. Not actually a wolf? In 2021, researchers analysing ancient DNA dropped a bombshell. Dire wolves were a highly distinct lineage, so distinct that they split from the ancestors of living wolf-like canids around 5.7 million years ago. Meaning, a dire wolf isn't simply a grey wolf with a different coat and a bigger body. They're more like evolutionary lookalikes, similar shape, similar lifestyle, but separated by a very deep genetic gap. And that gap becomes a huge problem if you're trying to bring one back. Because de-extinction usually needs a living relative as a starting point. So, with that in mind, Chapter 3. Announcement that started a firestorm. In April 2025, biotech company Colossal Biosciences announced what they called the world's first de-extinction, the birth of 3 dire wolves. The wolves were named Romulus, Remus and Khaleesi, and the story went viral instantly. But scientists and critics pushed back hard for one main reason. The animals were not created by cloning a dire wolf. Instead, Colossal used grey wolves as the base, and then edited specific genes to push the grey wolf body toward dire wolf-like traits. That's where the debate begins. If you edit a modern animal to resemble an extinct one, what do you call it? Chapter 4. What did they actually do in the lab? They started with dire wolf fossils and pulled out genetic clues, DNA fragments that can hint at traits people associate with dire wolves. Then they took cells from a modern grey wolf and used gene editing to change a small set of specific locations, about 20 edits across 14 genes, aiming to push features like body build and coat traits in a more dire wolf-like direction. After that, they used a cloning-style technique to turn those edited cells into embryos, and those embryos were carried by surrogate domestic dogs until the pups were born. So yes, these are real, living animals produced through advanced genetics, but the key detail is that they're not an ancient dire wolf genome brought back to life. They're modern wolves engineered to express a curated set of dire wolf-like traits, and that's exactly why the criticism exploded. Chapter 5. Why experts say it isn't a dire wolf? Critics keep coming back to 3 core objections. First, they argue the edits are simply too small in number to justify the name dire wolf. Even if 2 genomes are described as mostly similar, that can still hide millions of differences, so changing only a limited set of gene sites doesn't rebuild an extinct species. It tweaks a living one. Second, they say a species isn't defined by appearance alone. Colossal's framing leans on the idea that if an animal looks and expresses key traits like a dire wolf, it's fair to use that label. But most biologists tie species identity to lineage and evolutionary history, things you can't fully recreate when the original line is gone. Third, there's the deeper genetic gap. Dire wolves split from the ancestors of modern, wolf-like canids millions of years ago. And that distance matters because you're not just adjusting a few features, you'd be trying to reconstruct an entire evolutionary path. Even Colossal's own chief scientist later emphasised that these animals are edited grey wolves, and that producing something truly identical to an extinct species isn't really possible. And that's where the story gets more interesting, because beneath the argument over the name is a bigger question. What does bringing back actually mean in the age of de-extinction? Chapter 6. The definition that changes everything. When people say an extinct animal has been brought back, they're usually talking about one of three very different things. The first is true resurrection, an animal that is genetically identical to the original species, which is close to impossible for most extinctions because we don't have intact cells, perfect DNA, or the exact developmental conditions that shaped the real thing. The second is a genetic proxy, a living species that's been engineered to resemble the extinct one in targeted ways. And that's the category Colossal's dire wolf project fits most closely, an edited modern animal designed to express a chosen set of dire wolf traits. The third is functional replacement, where the goal isn't to recreate the exact animal, but to restore the ecological role it once filled, like rebuilding a predator that can influence an ecosystem in a similar way. And that's where the argument gets heated, because if an engineered wolf looks and acts like a top predator from the Ice Age, some people feel comfortable calling that a comeback, while many scientists say it's still not the extinct species, just a modern stand-in. The public, meanwhile, hears the headline and imagines Jurassic Park, and that gap between the science and the story is exactly why this debate matters. Chapter 7. Why this debate matters. Here's what gets missed when the argument turns into a fight over the name. Even if these animals aren't true, dire wolves, the technology behind them is still a major leap. The same gene editing tools and cloning techniques could be used to support species that are alive right now, restoring lost genetic diversity in tiny populations, helping animals resist emerging diseases, and giving endangered species a better chance of surviving the next few decades. But that's exactly where critics raise a warning flag. Flashy de-extinction headlines can pull attention, funding, and urgency away from conservation, while the species we still have are disappearing in real time. Because extinction was never only a DNA problem, it's a habitat problem, it's a pressure problem, and ultimately it's a human decision problem. So, did scientists bring back the dire wolf? If you mean the real, genetically authentic Enocean dirus, no. If you mean an engineered wolf built to show dire wolf-like traits, yes. Now you decide, does the name matter, or is it something new? Comment your take. And for more extinct animal science, like, subscribe, and join the De-Extinction Lab.